In the heart of the cursed Devil's Triangle, two rival captains, pirate legend Ironhand Graves and ruthless naval officer Edward Hawke, are forced into an uneasy alliance to claim Admiral Langley's forbidden treasure. But this isn't just gold they're after. It's a prize bound by a deadly curse, guarded by the ghost of Langley himself and his haunted crew. As their men face twisted spirits and a doom-laden island, both captains must decide, how far will they go to escape with their lives? And can they trust each other? Or will their greed lead them to an even darker fate? The dark horizon was thick with fog, rolling in like the breath of a beast, coiling around the ship as though it sensed the pirate's ambition. The dark Leviathan cut through the waves with ruthless intent, her dark sails drawn taut against a rising wind, carrying Captain Roland Ironhand Graves and his ragged crew toward the most feared part of the Caribbean, the cursed waters known as the Devil's Triangle. Ironhand's eyes gleamed as he clutched a blood-stained map in his gloved hand, a map ripped from the personal journal of none other than Admiral Percival Langley himself. Every line, every smear of ink whispered of immense riches, but with an ominous warning. No pirate, they said, had dared touch Langley's treasure and survived to boast of it. Ironhand's crew moved with silent determination, but the tension among them was as sharp as cutlass steel. Some whispered of curses, others of vengeful spirits, but Ironhand, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it all as sailor superstition. What lay before them was a prize greater than any legend, a fortune amassed by Langley during his vicious campaign against pirates. Each coin a reminder of a ship burned, a crew torn apart. This treasure wasn't just wealth. It was revenge against the empire that had hounded pirates for decades. A whistle from the crow's nest shattered the silence. Ship on the horizon, red and white sails. British Navy. The crew froze. Eyes went wide, faces paled. None needed reminding of what a British Navy ship meant, especially one flying the notorious colors of the gallant Revenge, a vessel as feared by pirates as the Dark Leviathan was by merchants. Captain Edward Hawke, known as the Hound of the Caribbean, commanded that ship with an iron fist, his mission clear: hunt down pirates, crush rebellion, and take no survivors. Ironhand grinned, a sharp, dangerous flash of teeth. "Bring us about. Ready the cannons." His voice was laced with the thrill of confrontation, and the crew sprang into action. The clash of pirates and navy was inevitable, and Ironhand relished it. This was what he lived for. But as the gallant Revenge closed in, something strange stirred in the fog. The air turned cold, unnaturally so, and a chill swept through the deck. The cannons were loaded, the crew braced, yet an uneasy silence held the ship as they waited for the inevitable fire to erupt. And then from the fog, a shape appeared, a figure clad in ghostly armor, shimmering with a dark blue hue, eyes blazing like embers. It was Admiral Langley. A low, hollow voice carried over the sea, chilling each pirate to the bone. "Who dares seek my resting place?" The voice was a curse itself, heavy with malice, a threat that seemed to reach into the souls of all who heard it. Ironhand's bravado faltered, just a flicker before he snarled, "Ready the cannon fire, curse or not, we press on." The crew hesitated, glancing at one another, but their captain's iron will held them steady. The first cannon blast roared into the fog, shaking the Dark Leviathan, as smoke and flames erupted into the night. But when the smoke cleared, the gallant Revenge was still there, now eerie and silent, like a ghost ship drifting closer, as if drawn by some invisible force. Captain Hawke, standing at the helm of his ship, raised his sword, his eyes narrowing as he met Ironhand's gaze across the water. "Graves!" Hawke's voice boomed across the waves. "Turn your ship around. Whatever lies here isn't meant for the likes of you, or anyone." But there was no turning back. Ironhand's pride flared, his gaze challenging as he yelled back, "And leave this prize for the British? Not a chance, Hawke." He motioned his crew forward, determined to press on through both fog and fear. Yet the curse tightened its grip. With a blast that shook the sea itself, a wall of waves crashed between the ships, rocking both vessels. Out of nowhere, the air was filled with the sounds of chains rattling and ghostly whispers, an unearthly chorus that grew louder, each voice colder than the last. In an instant, Langley's specter reappeared, this time directly between the two ships, his form casting a long shadow that seemed to freeze the very air. "Turn back," he commanded. his voice slicing through the chaos. "Or be damned as I was, to haunt these waters forever." But neither captain would yield. Ironhand's thirst for treasure and Hawke's unyielding pride formed a deadly bond of defiance. They pressed forward, both ships moving as one, a twisted alliance formed by their refusal to bow to fear. Yet as they advanced, the fog thickened, becoming an impenetrable wall that swallowed them whole, blocking out all sight of the world beyond. They were trapped, and in that cursed fog they could hear the hollow sound of an ancient bell tolling, a call to those who dared disturb the grave of Admiral Langley. The fog seemed alive, a thick, ghostly shroud clinging to the dark Leviathan and the gallant Revenge, binding them together in the silent waters of the Devil's Triangle. Each crewman, pirate and navy alike, felt its eerie chill creep down their spines. The fog muffled sound, creating a tense stillness that made every breath, every heartbeat, feel like a deafening drum. Captain Ironhand Graves kept his hand clenched around the hilt of his cutlass, his knuckles white as he faced forward, searching the mist for the first sign of their prize, or their doom. Captain Hawke of the gallant Revenge stared grimly across the narrow gap between the ships. The two captains locked eyes, an unspoken truce hanging between them. Neither had any illusions that this alliance would last. They were bound only by mutual desperation. But in these cursed waters, pride and rivalry were worthless if they didn't survive to see the dawn. As the ships drifted forward, every step into the fog seemed to make the world colder. Crewmen muttered prayers, fingers twitching nervously over the hilts of their weapons. Even the seasoned hands who had seen countless battles and storms began to lose their nerve. Suddenly, a scream pierced the silence. From the dark Leviathan's deck, a pirate stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror, pointing toward the water. A face had appeared just beneath the surface, a woman's face, eyes blank and mouth frozen in a silent scream, her hair flowing like seaweed around her head. The sight of it froze the men in place, their courage drained away by the unearthly apparition. Ironhand snarled, "Keep moving or she'll drag you down herself. There's nothing here but shadows." But the words rang hollow, even to him. The cursed fog seemed to pulse, breathing around them, and now ghostly figures began to rise on both sides, floating just below the water's surface, their pale faces staring up with empty eyes. Hawke's voice sliced through the unease. "Graves, whatever you've unleashed, it's bound to us both. We need to reach the island and settle this. That specter won't let us go until we do." Ironhand scowled, but he knew Hawke was right. There was no turning back. "Then let's make this quick," he growled. "If we're lucky, Langley's curse will only claim one of us." He motioned to his crew, and with a wary glance at their ghostly surroundings, the two ships pressed on. As they neared the island, the waters grew turbulent, the waves churning in strange, unnatural patterns. A jagged line of rocks emerged from the mist, like the teeth of some massive sea beast ready to devour them whole. Ironhand shouted for his men to steer clear, but as if in defiance, the gallant Revenge moved to cut them off, blocking the dark Leviathan's path. Hawke raised his hand, signaling a halt, and a low rumble of voices passed through both crews. The pirates gripped their cutlasses and pistols, eyes darting toward the Navy men, as tense as if a battle might erupt at any moment. Hawke stepped to the edge of his deck, his expression steely. "This alliance holds, Graves. But try to double-cross me again and I'll see to it that your ship doesn't leave these waters. Curse or no curse." Ironhand laughed, a hollow sound against the silence. "Worry about your own crew, Hawke. The treasure waits for no man." With a begrudging nod, he signaled for his crew to stand down, and the two ships continued, moving side by side toward the island's dark silhouette in the mist. As they approached the shore, the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. Shadows swirled over the sands, faint figures that dissolved as they tried to make them out. The entire island felt alive, humming with a presence that made the hair on the back of every neck stand up. Ironhand and Hawke led their crews forward, each step echoing on the stony ground, until they reached an ancient stone gate, half buried and wrapped in twisted vines. The gate bore symbols that neither pirate nor naval officer recognized, symbols that seemed to twist and writhe under their gaze. Hawke motioned to a young officer at his side, who stepped forward reluctantly, brushing away the vines. A single phrase was carved into the stone: "Here lies the damned. Those who enter do not return." Ironhand smirked, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Just another warning to keep out the faint-hearted. He pushed the gate, and with a groan of ancient stone it creaked open, revealing a dark passage that sloped downward into the heart of the island. They ventured into the darkness, torches held high, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance along the stone walls. The air grew thick, laced with a smell of decay and salt, and as they descended, strange sounds echoed from the depths, whispers that sent chills down their spines. Halfway down the passage, the ground trembled, and an inhuman wail erupted from the depths, shaking dust loose from the stone ceiling. A figure materialized in the shadows ahead, a translucent form clad in the unmistakable armor of the British Navy. His eyes glowed with a furious fire, his mouth twisting into a scowl as he looked upon both crews. It was Langley. "Fools," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You dare disturb my sanctuary. You come for the gold, the jewels, thinking yourself worthy." His gaze drifted from Ironhand to Hawke, his spectral fingers curling like claws. "Only the damned cross these gates." Ironhand forced himself to laugh, though his heart thundered. "We've been cursed long before we set foot here, Langley. Now step aside or be swept aside." Langley's laughter filled the passageway, echoing off the stone walls. "Then join me, Captain Graves." With that, his form dissolved, melting into the shadows, and the way forward lay open. Yet neither Ironhand nor Hawke could shake the feeling that they were being watched, that Langley's eyes followed their every step. They pushed onward, reaching a vast chamber lit by the glow of phosphorescent stones embedded in the walls. In the center of the room lay Langley's treasure, a pile of gold and gems that sparkled like stars, strewn across the floor in reckless abandon. But at the heart of the pile sat a black iron chest, bound with chains and etched with the same symbols that had guarded the island gate. Ironhand took a step forward, his hand outstretched, but as his fingers brushed the chest, a pulse of dark energy shot through the air, and a voice, a chorus of voices deep and resonant, whispered, "Turn back, or be bound as we are." But Ironhand only laughed, his greed blinding him to the warning. Riches beyond reckoning lying in wait for fools who turn back? Not a chance. Yet as he reached for the chest once more, Hawke's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Don't be a fool, Graves. This treasure was never meant to be taken." Ironhand tore his arm free. "And you think the Empire deserves it?" he spat. "I'll see this treasure freed from its cage." But even as he spoke, the shadows began to move, swirling around them, forming shapes. The twisted forms of sailors and soldiers, trapped and bound to the treasure for eternity, their eyes hollow and pleading. They whispered warnings, curses, their faces contorted in silent screams. And as the two captains stared into the darkness, they realized that Langley's curse was no simple haunt. This was an unholy pact, a snare set by the dead to trap the living. And once the chest was touched, there would be no escape. The chamber pulsed with dark energy, every shadow alive with a vengeful spirit bound to Langley's curse. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the island itself wanted to keep them there forever. Ironhand and Hawke stood frozen, their eyes locked on the black iron chest at the heart of the treasure. Around them, ghostly faces began to form, their hollow eyes pleading silently, warning them to turn back before it was too late. But Ironhand's greed burned hotter than any fear. He was a pirate through and through, and this treasure was his for the taking. He shoved Hawke's hand aside, his fingers stretching toward the chains that bound the chest. Just as his hand closed around the cold iron, the chamber shook violently. A deafening roar filled the air, and the ground beneath them buckled, throwing both men off their feet. From the shadows, Admiral Langley's specter emerged, his face twisted in fury. "Fools!" he thundered, his voice reverberating through the chamber like a storm. "You think to steal what was never yours, what even I could not keep in life or death?" Ironhand scrambled to his feet, glaring at the specter. "I've come too far to leave empty-handed, Langley. Stand aside, or I'll tear this curse apart myself." But Langley only laughed, a hollow, bone-chilling sound. "Your pride will be your undoing, Captain Graves." His form began to grow, expanding until he towered over the chamber, a dark titan of ghostly rage. His spectral hands reached out, clawed fingers curling as the shadows obeyed his command, swirling and tightening around the pirates and Navy men alike. Captain Hawke, his own face pale but resolute, drew his sword, its blade gleaming in the unnatural light. "Stand with me, Graves," he called, "or we're all bound to this curse." The two captains exchanged a look, ironclad hatred tempered by a spark of reluctant respect. Their truce was fragile, but the looming specter of Admiral Langley left them no choice. Together, they rallied their crews, ordering their men to form a defensive circle around the treasure, swords and pistols at the ready. The pirates and navy men braced themselves, a ragged band of desperate souls facing a supernatural force, far beyond anything they'd ever encountered. Langley's ghostly voice filled the chamber once more. "You cannot fight what has already claimed you," he intoned, his eyes blazing with spectral fire. "Join me and your names shall be whispered in terror across the seas. Resist and be lost to darkness." But Ironhand's eyes narrowed. "I'll not be bound by the likes of you, Langley." With a fierce cry, he lunged forward, his cutlass flashing as he slashed through the air. His blade cut through Langley's form, scattering wisps of shadow, but the specter only reformed, laughing darkly at the pirates' futile attack. Around them, the spirits of Langley's crew rose from the shadows, twisted and bound to the treasure, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. The navy men and pirates fought back with desperation, hacking at the spirits that surrounded them, but their blades passed through the phantoms like mist. Just when all seemed lost, Hawke's gaze fell on the symbols etched into the iron chest, ancient twisted runes that glowed faintly with a sickly green light. He knew enough of such markings from his time in the Navy, strange relics confiscated from foreign shores. They were marks of binding, spells of entrapment meant to seal powerful forces. With a sudden reckless hope, he turned to Ironhand. "The chest! It's the key to this curse. If we break it, we might just sever Langley's hold." Ironhand looked at the chest, his jaw clenched. He'd come for the treasure, but now he realized the only way to survive was to destroy it. Nodding reluctantly, he shouted to his men, "To the chest! Smash it open!" With newfound determination, the pirates and navy men closed ranks, fighting their way toward the black iron chest. Langley's specter roared in fury, the shadows around him twisting violently as he tried to stop them, sending his ghostly minions to block their path. The men fought with everything they had, their swords slashing through the spectral forms as they closed in on the chest. Finally, Hawke reached the chest, his hand gripping a rusted torch. He brought it down with all his strength, shattering the iron chains that bound it. The chest burst open with an explosion of green light, a wave of raw energy surging outward, knocking everyone back. Langley screamed, his form flickering, his ghostly features contorting in agony. "No, you do not understand what you've unleashed." His voice echoed through the chamber as his figure began to dissolve, pulled back into the depths of the curse he had once commanded. The spectral crew around him vanished one by one, their forms fading into the mist as they were finally freed. But as Langley's voice faded, a new sound filled the air, a rumbling from deep below. The treasure, all that glittering gold and jewels, began to sink into the earth, as if the island itself was swallowing it back. The ground trembled violently, cracks snaking across the chamber floor. Ironhand grabbed Hawke by the arm, dragging him to his feet. "We have to move. The whole island's coming down." They turned and ran, leading their men through the crumbling passage as the chamber collapsed behind them. Stones crashed from the ceiling, the walls buckling as the curse unraveled. The desperate scramble to escape was chaos. Men shouting, tripping, pushing each other as the world fell apart around them. They burst out of the ancient stone gate just as the tunnel caved in behind them, sealing the cursed treasure and Langley's spirit forever. The two captains and their men staggered out onto the beach, gasping for breath, their faces smeared with dirt and sweat. Around them, the fog began to lift, revealing the sea beyond, calm and deceptively innocent. Ironhand looked back at the island, his face a mix of relief and anger. The treasure he had sought was lost, swallowed by the very curse he had sought to break. Hawke, his face grim, turned to him. "This was no victory, Graves. The curse might be broken, but there's nothing left to show for it." Ironhand's eyes hardened, his pride wounded, but he gave a curt nod. "Perhaps, but I'd rather leave empty-handed than join Langley's fate." They shared a final, grudging nod before returning to their ships, each man exhausted, haunted by the price of their ambition. The sea awaited, vast and indifferent, ready to swallow their secrets and bear them to new horizons. As the two ships drifted apart, the last traces of the cursed fog faded, leaving the island shrouded in silence once more. But beneath the sand and stone, the twisted chest and its dark legacy remained, waiting for the next fool who dared disturb its peace. The cursed fog lifted entirely as the dark Leviathan and the gallant Revenge drifted apart, each ship battered but afloat. The taste of victory turned bitter in every man's mouth. The island shrank in the distance, swallowed by the mist once more, leaving no trace of the deadly adventure that had unfolded in its depths. Captain Roland Ironhand Graves stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his expression unreadable. He was a pirate stripped of his prize, his ambition dashed against the supernatural force that guarded Langley's cursed treasure. Around him, his crew worked in silence, their faces pale, haunted by the memory of the ghosts they had faced and the friends they had lost. No one spoke of the treasure. No one dared. The price of greed had been etched into their hearts, a wound that would linger long after the journey home. Across the water, Captain Edward Hawke guided the gallant Revenge in the opposite direction, his jaw set in grim contemplation. Though he had escaped the curse with his life, he could not shake the sensation that it had marked him, that some fragment of Langley's rage still clung to him. His men cast uneasy glances at the sea, the weight of the ordeal pressing down on them. They had survived where many had not, but at what cost? The two captains exchanged a final nod of respect across the waves, a silent acknowledgement of the tenuous alliance that had saved them both. For a brief haunting moment, they were more than enemies. They were survivors, bound by the memory of Langley's wrath and the horrors they had shared. But in the cruel code of the seas, alliances were fleeting, and their paths diverged as they drifted further apart. Ironhand's first mate, a wiry man named Finch with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, approached him hesitantly. "Captain, what'll we tell the men? They were promised riches." Ironhand's gaze hardened, his hand gripping the wheel. "Tell them the truth, Finch. That treasure was cursed from the start. Better we leave it to rot with Langley than to drag it aboard and meet his fate ourselves." Finch nodded, though the disappointment was clear in his eyes. He had been among those who whispered about Langley's fortune, who dreamed of the life it could buy. But now, he understood as well as any that the true fortune lay in their survival, in the fact that they could sail away with their lives. Wordlessly, he returned to his duties, and Ironhand resumed his post, steering the dark Leviathan toward open waters. The sea stretched wide before them, endless and wild, promising new adventures and new dangers. But even as they sailed away, the lingering shadows of Langley's curse clung to Ironhand's thoughts. He knew his men would carry tales of the cursed island, stories of Admiral Langley and the cursed treasure, whispered in taverns and harbors across the Caribbean. But Ironhand himself would speak of it no more. He would bury it, along with his ambition, deep in the recesses of his mind. Days passed, the island becoming little more than a haunting memory. Yet each night when Ironhand closed his eyes, he saw Langley's face, the ghostly eyes staring into his soul, reminding him of the cost of his greed. In dreams, he was pulled back to that cursed chamber, the cold grip of Langley's shadow tightening around him, a reminder that some treasures were not meant for mortal hands. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast a blood-red hue across the waves, Ironhand stood alone on the deck, watching the horizon. Finch approached him quietly, a question in his eyes. "What now, Captain? Where to?" Ironhand didn't answer at first, his gaze fixed on the sun sinking into the sea. Finally, he looked at Finch, his expression grim but resolute. "We sail onward, Finch. The sea holds other fortunes, other prizes worth claiming, but let Langley's treasure rest. That curse will claim no more of us." Finch nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his captain's words. He glanced back at the crew, their eyes hollowed by what they had endured, yet still loyal, still ready to follow Ironhand wherever he led. Ironhand gave a final nod to Finch, his resolve renewed. As the stars began to pierce the evening sky, the dark Leviathan set a course toward open waters, her sails billowing in the wind, a shadow against the fading light. The crew, weary but unbroken, moved with a quiet determination, the lessons of Langley's curse etched deeply in their minds. Ironhand's gaze swept over his men, each face familiar, each life precious now that he understood the true cost of treasure. They were all marked by the adventure, changed in ways they couldn't yet comprehend, but they had survived where others had not. And perhaps, he mused, that was the real fortune he had sought all along. As they sailed further from the island, the faint sound of chains rattling drifted on the breeze, a chilling reminder of Langley's curse. Ironhand's hand tightened on the wheel, and he whispered a vow to the night. Let no man return to that island. Let no pirate, no navy, dare disturb the dead. The dark Leviathan slipped into the darkness, her course set for distant shores, leaving behind a mystery, a curse, and the haunting legacy of Admiral Langley. But even as the island disappeared from sight, the tale of the Admiral's revenge would live on, a legend among pirates and sailors, a story of cursed treasure, lost souls, and the price of ambition. The next dawn broke clear and bright, as if the horrors of the night before had been nothing more than a dream. But in every port, in every tavern along the coast, the tale of Ironhand graves and the cursed treasure of Admiral Langley would spread, whispered in awe and fear, warning those who dared to chase the shadow of a prize that lay beyond the reach of the living. Subscribe to You Pirate for more tales of danger, daring, and the mysteries of the high seas. Share this adventure with a friend who dares brave the unknown, or who just might be mad enough to seek cursed treasure themselves. And don't forget, adventure is waiting, if you're bold enough to seek it.